When was the last time your buyer was actually in the room when you made a decision about them? Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Jasmine. This podcast exists because that question matters more than most marketing teams realize. Let's get into it. In reports that came out earlier this year in 2026, IBM and the National Retail Federation surveyed 18,000 consumers across 23 countries and found that 45% of them now use AI somewhere in their buying journey. 41% use it to research a product before they'll talk to a salesperson. In Adobe's 2026 AI and Digital Trends report, a separate study of 4,000 consumers, they found that 1 in 4 now treat an AI platform as their main research tool, ahead of brand websites and ahead of reviews. So if you work in life sciences marketing and you haven't touched a synthetic customer or an AI research tool yet, that's not a footnote. That's the buyer forming an opinion about your product in a conversation you were never invited to, or you didn't invite yourself to. Here's what that actually changes. The same Adobe report found that half of customers give a piece of marketing 2 to 5 seconds. Let me repeat that. Half of customers give a piece of marketing 2 to 5 seconds before they decide it's worth their attention. It used to be that a clumsy message still got a second chance after that. A buyer would read a brand site, then a review, then ask a colleague, and somewhere in that chain, a bad edit got caught or corrected. When a quarter of buyers skip that chain entirely and form their first impressions inside a single AI conversation, there's no second chance built in anymore. Whatever made it through your internal review is the message. Nothing downstream is going to fix it for you. So the pressure isn't really on the tool. Buyers already trust it enough to lead with it. The pressure is on what happens before the message ever reaches that conversation, inside your own building, in the room where someone decides what the buyer is allowed to hear. That's the room you, Matt, have written your new book about. Not a better AI tool, a decade of blog posts about persona docs, sales handoffs, and legal edits that turned out to be one argument wearing a different set of clothes. So before we get into the book itself, I'm curious, what's the story behind the story? What actually happened on that flight home from Sintra, Portugal?
I'd started writing a book earlier this year. It was about AI adoption in the life sciences. I was getting bored writing it. And I thought, if I'm getting bored writing it, people are going to get bored reading it. I thought it was an important book. I just felt that every time I wrote, some things changed, at least at the frontier of what was possible. And yet, as we know, organizations are still struggling to adapt to AI. While I was in Sintra, there were a number of conversations that happened. It was a fantastic retreat organized by Yuri Belast, the host of Future CMO Stories, author of The Future CMO, and a really, really good guy. And of course, his key invitee was Mark Schaefer, author of How AI Changes Your Customers, Marketing Rebellion, just to name a few of my personal favorites, not to forget Audacious as well. And so as we were talking about things, started realizing that really what I've been so passionate about over the years has been something that I'd always thought was a little bit frustrating, in that we collect all of this voice of customer. I've been involved in creating persona decks for people. Sometimes they were really detailed. Sometimes they were really thin. Obviously, the more detailed ones were potentially more useful. The thin ones, not so much. I'd interviewed so many customers and got so many pieces of information for organizations. And yet so much of that data just got forgotten. It would end up in a deck. And yet as the project went on, people spent less and less time going back to that source of information. And all they did was read it once and they go, right, I know what we need to do. Here's 3 things that I'll take with me. And eventually all of that work would be distilled into a single customer quote that kind of helped support what the project team would agree on themselves rather than actually what their corpus of interviews were actually telling them. So it's kind of a great example of, rather than group think, group forgetting. What I've been experimenting with ever since custom GPTs became available was using that kind of functionality to create councils, to create better and better representations of our customers so that we can use them to capture all of that knowledge. So that was really the book that I wrote, not just about where in that process we lost sight of the customer, but also maybe one of the ways to help keep the customer present. It's not the only way. Is it a fix all in its own? No. But I do really believe that AI gives us a chance to look at the processes that we currently have in place and actually use AI and organizational change to really put us far more focus on the customer than we've ever had before.
So to put maybe a bit of a finer point on it, in the 10 years of you pushing the PDF versions of AI up a hill, so to speak, did any client ever say it back to you first, name that pattern before you did, and you just didn't hear it yet?
I don't think people ever named the pattern because they didn't see it. What I observed, and of course, you and I have famously said a number of times that I worked on a persona project for you, and those persona just disappear. They serve a very narrow purpose as part of a project, but while they're a tool that can be used across a whole range of different parts of the business and marketing campaigns, they get used for a specific thing and then they get forgotten about. What I would hear more often than not would that, we started some persona work here, or here they are, they're not finished. And then even once they were finished, you might have a series of questions from a content marketing perspective. Here's the key question, the things that we need to do. And even people I worked alongside in agencies with, you would have to remind them to go back and look at the persona docs where all of that information was captured. Because they were a key part of the strategy. They were the personification of the strategy in many ways. And so what I heard was almost an absence of that information being shared and a kind of a somewhat embarrassment. If you look at sort of ethnography and sort of hidden needs research that I learned from Professor Keith Goffin, what I really took away from that was to look at the things that people say that kind of shows that they're working around things, that shows that they're not necessarily telling you, they're not lying to you, but they're telling you about what they think they do isn't actually what they do. And that's one of the things that I've observed time and time again, is that people say that they're focused on the customer. And yet actually what they really are is they're focused on each individual's mental model of the customer rather than a shared agreement about who that customer is. And that's a problem I'm trying to solve.
So did that realization change the first question you ask in a new client conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because now the question is very much more along the lines of, tell me about your customers. Who is it you think you serve? When was the last time you spoke? When was the last time you actually codified information? How are you storing information? All of those things change. And better yet, it's not just how are you capturing the information and where are you storing it, but how are you bringing it to life? And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
What I was also listening for that I don't think I heard you say is you're actually now much more dialed in to the cross-section of their own approval chain and where that sits relative to the buyers. And that intersection is where you tend to focus the beginning of conversations.
It's definitely part of it. I think the approval chain probably comes downstream of really understanding what they know about their customer. That the approval chain is one where the voice of the customer can get eradicated very, very quickly. So even if a marketer has done their best work and they've really, really focused in on all of that customer research and they're using all the language that they've heard, that approval chain is where that messaging gets chipped away. Imagine it as a sculpture. The marketer has taken a great big block of sandstone and they've carved a beautiful statue from it. And then legal come along and they chip a little bit off. And other people in the process come along and chip a little bit off. And I'm not just pointing fingers at legal here or regulatory, but everybody that touches that piece is chipping a little bit off. And when what they put back is maybe different, stuck almost super glue and it doesn't really fit. And it certainly doesn't represent the customer. And so I think that's really where, for me, we have a problem in that we don't have the shared view of what's important to the customer as we go through those chains. And so having a customer that can sit alongside that process to try to keep each of those changes in line with what a customer might actually want to hear, I think that's a really important thing to be able to offer people.
I'd like to dig in a little bit more. I love the chipping away analogy that you use to describe this term you call organizational gravity. Some might say that term is a rebranding for being risk averse. It could be a rebranding for groupthink or committee culture. What's the story behind why you thought it was necessary to give it a new name?
Actually, organizational gravity isn't necessarily new. A gentleman called Mike Crum came up with an idea, and it was really to do with organizational gravity, which was why change doesn't happen. I didn't know this when I started using it. I came to using that frame of my own free will. But what was really interesting when I discovered his work, as I was writing an article for Forbes, is that what he said was that basically there is a level of inertia and a series of beliefs within an organization that stops change happening. That same set of beliefs or weight of beliefs is exactly what stops organizations really listening to their customers and really bringing that into their decision making about how they develop products, about how they market them, and then how they sell them. And so that's really the way it goes. So I don't think it's so much of a rebranding. It's more understanding that this also isn't the fault of any one person individually. You can put anybody in the organization, and the organization has its own culture. It has its own mass. And that mass of people that you spend your time talking to, working through, oh, we've got to get this campaign out, that campaign out, we've got to rebrand these web pages, whatever it is, there becomes such a force to pull everything to what the organization believes rather than what the customer actually needs.
So, do you think it's actually helping organizations find a vocabulary for maybe things they've felt in the past, but now it's much more clearly defined, as well as a remedy for that being defined?
Yes, I do. You can't fix something until you've named it. There are many diseases out there that present in different ways. IgG4 related disease, an example, was named and recognized as a disease 20 years ago. And the first drugs are only now coming to market for this. But you start looking at these diseases where actually all of a sudden there are bits of conditions and you finally come up with a recognition of what is actually a condition. And I believe that all of the symptoms that we talked about, whether it's people making the wrong decisions in product development, wrong positioning, marketing campaigns that don't land or that drift away from the customer as something goes through approval processes, those are all things that come from a misalignment of our understanding of the customer. Now, can you codify exactly what a customer will say, think, or do, and how they will react to things? Absolutely not. But can we do a better job of bringing to life everything you know about those customers? Absolutely. And can you then make that available to everybody involved? And that's really the challenge I'm issuing to people through the book, is to think about how can you bring the customer much, much closer into the whole process without having to burden the customer of being in the room themselves in every single meeting.
So, if we continue to pull on the disease and the remedy analogy, can you talk to us a little bit more about the remedy of creating grounded synthetic customers and really help us fine tune our understanding of what grounded means?
Yeah, sure. Good prompting will tell you you will operate as a whatever expert in whatever field. You could do the same with your enter customer profile here. That's fine. And it will do a half decent job of creating an understanding of what does that customer really think, because these large language models are trained on a ton of data about normal people. What that misses is all of the information that you actually already know about your customer. So that grounding is all of the information that you've already collected. So the voice of customer research that you've just spent thousands and thousands on, can we take that and bring that into a synthetic customer? Absolutely. The stuff we did 10 years ago, absolutely, we can bring that in too. We can bring in the quantitative surveys. We can bring in records from the CRM if we want to, information from sales transcript. Now, you don't put everything in verbatim because that becomes unwieldy, but you start to do a thematic analysis and really trying to distill out the important elements from each of those pieces of information and those data sets. And then what you also can do is look at what are people saying online, look at what are people actually communicating and talking about. It might be about the brands that you believe you compete with. Then you might find some new ones that you didn't know you were competing with. You might also find information out about the space that you operate in. And by bringing all of that together, all of a sudden you've got a representation of your customer. While it's imperfect, is a lot closer than any one thing that anybody currently has to interrogate right now. And so that's really what the grounding is. It's grounding in a lot of information that you either know or can find out about your customers and bringing that together in a way that is unique to you and your organization.
So let's move into some more practical type of questions. What's the actual tell that a synthetic customer someone's using is grounded versus an ungrounded impression wearing somebody else's outfit?
It really depends on the questions that you're asking them. The majority of times when you're using a synthetic customer, you're actually just asking a large language model, what's in the model? What really tells a grounded synthetic customer that's had a lot of time and effort put into building that data set? Are they starting to sound like your customers? Are they repeating back what you know? Are they actually telling you information that isn't generic, but is actually far more specific? And that's really where you start to find out the difference. So that's really the way that you would test the two together. How closely does it align to what we actually really know about our customers?
Okay. And last one here. If somebody wanted to start getting into synthetic customers and using synthetic customers, what are 2 tips you would give them that they can start thinking about tomorrow?
The first is any synthetic customer is only as good as the data that you can provide it. So the more information that you can capture about your customers, hopefully in a structured but exploratory way. So qualitative research and not just what are the top 10 questions about X, but really get under the skin of what's important to them. What's their jobs like? What are their days like? You can really start to understand more and more about the people behind the job role, as well as their motivations. And so I think that's one of the things that's really important to really try to understand who is it you're really selling to? You know, our customers are each individual. Sales know this. Marketing tends to overlook this a little bit at times. Sales tend to have a really deep but narrow view of the customer. Marketing has a very broad but shallow view of the customer. What we really try to do with synthetic customers is to be able to blend those two together so that where it's important, we have a broad view across the customers that we're looking to target, but we're able to take those deep dives into each of those customers when we need to. And it might be that we don't very often need to have a deep dive into a procurement person, but we all know that procurement is where deals go to die. And so we need to understand as part of our sales process, as part of our marketing, what is it that procurement need to know about us? What can we do to grease the wheels to make sure that procurement see what they need to see from us, and so that procurement go, yeah, there's no blocks here. Time and time again, I've seen that organizations that do know their customers are really great at talking to the person whose problem you're solving, but they're not really very good at providing the information to influence all of the rest of the people that are involved in buying. So it's really getting to understand your customer and then learn about the context that they operate in so you can do a better job of understanding who is it I actually need to influence to help make those sales happen.
So your full blog is on the striven.com website, and we'll drop the link in the show notes. Matt, while that quarter of buyers we opened with is out there right now forming opinions in AI conversations your team isn't in the room for, where can someone get your book to change that potential fate?
Well, there's either a webpage on the striven.com website where they can learn a little bit more about it, but it's available on Amazon worldwide. Although I've just learned that Kindle Direct Publishing doesn't necessarily put paperbacks available worldwide. It is limited to some markets, but yeah, they should be available worldwide to purchase, at least as an e-publication.
Right. And just as a reminder, the name of the book
is The Buyer in the Loop, and it looks a little bit like this.
it looks a lot like that.
It does. That's actually just a postcard, and I don't have a copy of the book, but it's also nice and thin.
Okay.
So it takes maybe 2 to 3 hours to read. I had some really wonderful comments of people. People have shown me the pages of notes they've been taking, because apparently it's full of actionable insights that you can take away as well, without actually ever really putting a framework in front of you. So hopefully it's a nice, easy read full of ideas and actionable takeaways without actually feeling like a textbook.
It completely is. I've read it now cover to cover 2 or 3 times. And so I have different notes in different colors for each time I've read it. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of A Splice of Life Science Marketing.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to A Splice of Life Science Marketing. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
If this conversation helped you, the single biggest way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference.
You can find out more about us and the topics we discuss at striven.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you next time.